The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome, everyone, to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to visit us at any time, it's xzoneradiotv.com. And for the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We're coming to you on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and on Channel 32 on SimulTV at www.simultv.com. My guest this hour is no stranger to anyone who watches SimulTV, Channel 32, or listens to the X Zone, or who loves reading about UFOs, crashes, and has been a guest on every paranormal talk radio show going. And he's got a show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. I'm talking about Kevin Randle. And Kevin, good seeing you, buddy.
Yeah, it's good seeing you. Been a long time.
It has, my friend. And I must say, Kevin, that since you and I last talked, there's been a lot of stuff going on within the UFO community. This guy, David Grusch, for example, a whistleblower. What do you make about him?
I have concerns because we don't have a lot of information that we can vet. Mm-hmm. He talks about that he had met with a number of people or heard stories from a number of people that he trusts about crash retrievals. He talks about possible documentation. He talks about all kinds of things like that, but he presents us with nothing we can check. We don't get names. We don't get locations. We don't get dates. In one of the interviews, he dropped the idea of this crash in 1933 in Italy. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's been around the field for a long time knows that that's a hoax. My colleagues in Italy, in Europe, Eduardo Russo, for example, has said for 20 years this thing was a hoax. The idea was that Mussolini had captured a flying saucer. They retrieved the flying saucer. The Vatican was involved. The Pope didn't want the fascists to have it, and somehow the Americans ended up with it. There's documentation that smacks like something right out of the MJ-12 playbook. Mm-hmm. That cannot be corroborated. The archives listed as places where you could find this stuff don't exist. Some of the people don't exist. There's a real problem with that. And I'm thinking, well, if this guy is touting that as one of the better of the cases, what has he been talking about? I did a blog piece. I just put it up a couple of hours ago, as a matter of fact, about this called... well, it's the number one on my blog. It's about crash retrievals and me. I think it's talking about that sort of thing. But what I did was I'd gone back through some of the stuff that Don Schmidt, Tom Carey, and I had written about on this particular topic, Roswell specifically, where we name names. We give dates, we give locations, and in the blog posting, I put pictures of the people that we had talked to and what they had said about this whole thing. And it doesn't matter which side of the fence you come down on in this particular case. I'm reporting on what these people told me. Is it accurate? Is it good information? I think it is. But the point is, I've given you the names, I've given you the locations, I've given you the dates, I've given you the sources, I've provided the transcripts of the tapes, which I have the tapes, all leading to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And what we have from David Grusch is none of that. He just talks about, well, there's been 12 crashes and they retrieved bodies, or they may have retrieved bodies, and won't give us a lot of specifics that we can check into. I saw another interview with one of the reporters that had interviewed him, talking about how he supposedly had been sworn under oath to tell the truth in meetings with congressional representatives or Senate committees. Turns out he hasn't met with any senators at all. He's met with representatives of the senators, the senator staff. Mm-hmm. He may have appeared in front of a congressional panel at some point, but I don't know any of the details about that. Really don't have much of that. So we don't know if he was sworn in. to tell the truth. We don't know anything about that. And all we get are promises about what's going to come in the future. I am hopeful that what he's saying is the truth and it will be borne out in the future. But until we get to that point, we have to be very cautious and very skeptical of what's being said.
What danger does he pose to the UFO community?
He is getting an awful lot of interest from the mainstream media, which is kind of frightening given their attitudes. I know when Don Schmidt and I were going to meet with reporters for the Chicago Tribune, it ended up we were met in the hallway by an intern who told us that the editors just didn't believe this stuff and didn't want to hear about it. But they did meet with us and we did chat with them about it. I don't know what the story was when they finally did it. But if it blows up in our faces, which it can, it's going to be kind of like Condon Committee 3.0, which means simply for a long time after the Condon Committee report, that was the University of Colorado study in the late 1960s, it concluded there was nothing to this. For a long time after that, the go-to position of the skeptical community, and somewhat rightly so, was, well, the scientific community investigated this and they found there was nothing to it. In the interim, the last 50 years, we have gotten access to files, to letters, to documentation that shows us that the Condon Committee was a put-up job, that the Air Force wanted out of the UFO investigation. And there was an Air Force officer named Hippler who wrote to members of the Condon Committee, says, here's what we'd like you to find. We'd like you to find the Air Force had done a good job. There's nothing to this. And the Air Force should get out of the job of investigating UFOs. And lo and behold, 18 months later, what did they find? Those three things, but they'd agreed to it prior to the beginning of the investigation. The Roswell case, which I think is a very strong case, given the number of witnesses, given the interaction with the environment, given the hints that Air Force officers were involved, given the sheriff's report of what he'd seen, very strong case. They devoted 1 or 2 lines to it, which was saying, well, basically we couldn't get a hold of the cars, which were supposedly stalled at Level Land. We couldn't do any of the investigation, so we didn't do anything with it. And we can think of no way in which a electromagnetic field could suppress the car engine and then remove that field and the car engine would restart spontaneously. And I thought, well, there's a darn good question. Let's look into that. So I went through some probably 500 or 600 reports of UFOs interfering with the operation of vehicles. Mark Roddicker done a long report on that. Mm-hmm. And there's other sources that I was able to access. And I found out in the vast majority of the cases, the witness did not report the car starting spontaneously, but that the witness took some action. And they would say things like, once the UFO was gone, the car started normally. Well, did you twist the key? Did you do anything to make the car start? Only in a couple of the cases did the witness suggest the vehicle had started spontaneously. So their rejection of the Level Land type cases with stalled cars was not adequately researched. So I look at all of that stuff, but the point simply is, even with that, the Condon Committee report kind of suppressed UFO information for a long time because that was the go-to point. This scientific investigation didn't find anything to UFOs. And if this blows up, I fear that we're going to be, well, you know, we had all this stuff about this whistleblower, and it turned out there was some problems with his testimony.
Is it possible, Kevin, that this is the result of the American military wearing mud on their face after the Chinese balloon fiascos, that they needed to do something? They needed to get a distraction from that and put it back on UFOs, like many people believe they did going back to the Roswell days.
I don't think that the Chinese balloon fiasco, and that's a good term for it, by the way, really had anything to do with this, because this predated that. But so,
his media exposure predated the.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I was thinking in terms of this push for more information that goes back to.
No, I'm talking about David Grusch coming out and all this whistleblowing after the Chinese balloon fiasco.
In intelligence, if you discover a leak, mm-hmm. the thing you do is pump the leak with bad information to discredit all the information. And that might be the case here. Well, the leak is the Chinese balloon fiasco, and we pump this information out there. Now everybody's distracted talking about UFOs, or as they insist on calling them, UAPs. And we seem to be getting more interest. But I sat in on the when Sean Kirkpatrick sat in front of the Senate committee. It was the chairman of the committee, the senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst, and I think one other person sitting there questioning this guy. And you've got this huge room, and you've got this table with all these seats. And there's a picture of it on my blog, as a matter of fact, talking about this. But they never got into the substance. It was about the logistics. It was about the problems. It was about, we're doing this, we're doing that. We've looked at this many cases, we've done this, but there was no specifics. I sat on the NASA panel, which anybody could have done, of course, because it was all over the internet. And it was the same sort of thing. It was just a lot of the logistics and what we're going to do and what we're going to do about this. It wasn't anything about the investigations. Who are the investigators? What are they doing? What have they found? What else is in the files? I think if you go back to the Project Blue Book files and you go through those carefully, you're going to find a lot of spectacular cases. I just recently talked about the case from Austin, Texas, one of the last unidentifieds in the Project Blue Book files. What happened there was a guy had a sighting. He was in sight for 10 minutes. It was a cigar-shaped craft. He said that he'd stopped. He was watching it. He flashed the only code he could think, which was 3.14. And I'm thinking, great, if the aliens are using base 10 for their mathematical calculations, and if they're not, the 3.14 might not mean anything to them. But the Air Force investigators, an officer came out. They filled out their ridiculously long and uncomplicated form. And the Air Force wrote it off as insufficient data for scientific analysis. Well, he got angry and wrote to him, what more data could you possibly want? We filled out your form. The lieutenant, his name was Foreman, by the way, filled it out as completely as he could. I don't know what more I could tell you about this. And they finally categorized it as unidentified. But the point is they first inclination was put it in insufficient data for scientific analysis. And when you look at that, I estimate there's 4,000 to 5,000 cases in the Blue Book files that are insufficient data. That's not a solution. That's a categorization that gets it away from the dreaded unidentified category. And I think that's one of the things that we need to look at. There's good history here if we go back and we research it carefully.
If, in fact, the information that David Grusch was spreading with the media, would it not make sense that if it was true that the government would, in fact, throw it under national security and cause a media blackout?
Well, in this country, that'd be very difficult to do, especially with the information that's come out. They have to be very careful on that respect, because if they push too hard in that direction, then sometimes reporters actually do their jobs and do investigative journalism and cause more trouble than it's worth. But I think that the problem here is he's not given us anything to really work with. He's talking about people that he's talked to. I can make the same claims. Yeah. And that doesn't really get us any further along. I've talked to people who handled the debris. I've talked to people who claimed they saw the alien bodies. I mean, that puts me that much closer to the central core. Now, were those people lying to me? Well, some of them were, as a matter of fact, and we discovered that, and we outed them as soon as we found out that the information they were supplying wasn't credible. We made sure that everybody understood that, which has come back to haunt me a number of times, as a matter of fact.
Hey, Kevin, I hate to do this to you, my friend. We've got to take a commercial break. I believe your blog spot is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Geez, I wonder why I keep on remembering that one. Kevin Randle, great seeing you, my friend. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. And Kevin and I will return on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario. Check us out online at www.xzoneradiotv.com.
Question: what is the name of the unique blend of coffee you get that has been formulated by a neurologist, a neurobiologist, and a pharmaceutical chemist? Answer: you get Beautiful Mind coffee, A unique coffee blend that tastes great and has herbal ingredients that your brain will love, and it is not just coffee, it's brainalicious. Dr. Rathbone, Dr. Jang, and Dr. Winslow, the scientific team that created Beautiful Mind Coffee, decided to collaborate on a coffee focusing on brain health. As for those herbal ingredients found in Beautiful Mind Coffee, Dr. Rathbone, Dr. Jang, and Dr. Winslow, utilizing their combined extensive scientific research background, worked with many natural and herbal products until the exact formulation that is found in Beautiful Mind Coffee was created. With a unique scientific formula not found in any other coffee being sold or served, Beautiful Mind Coffee is the only coffee blend that contains 3 herbal ingredients found to aid in boosting your daily mental clarity and focus. Every cup of Beautiful Mind Coffee contains scientifically formulated amounts of maca root powder, green tea extract, and American ginseng, all supporting good brain health. Taking care of your brain's health now can help delay or prevent the onset of cognitive dysfunction, including dementia, Alzheimer's, and more general memory loss as you get older, just by enjoying the delicious flavor of our roasted coffee and herbal ingredients found exclusively in Beautiful Mind Coffee. Did you know that cognitive dysfunction also refers to deficits in attention, verbal and nonverbal learning, short-term and working memory, visual and auditory processing, problem solving, processing speed, and motor functioning? For more on Beautiful Mind Coffee, the 3 scientists who formulated Beautiful Mind Coffee, and more details on the 3 unique herbal ingredients in Beautiful Mind Coffee, visit www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca. Beautiful Mind Coffee is now available online at amazon.ca and amazon.com. To order Beautiful Mind Coffee, visit www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca today.
Welcome back, everyone. KevinRandle.blogspot.com is the website for the gentleman who you see with me here on the screen tonight, my good friend Kevin Randle. Kevin, why would a whistleblower blow his whistle if he's taken an oath to keep secrets?
I have no idea. I think there's a point where I think the whistleblower allegedly sees something that he or she believes is wrong and feels it necessary to communicate it to some other authority. And oftentimes that's a good thing. But there's others who are labeled as whistleblowers. I mean, all we know right now is that we are hearing rumors, things that he overheard, things that people told him about, but he hasn't presented any evidence. So what kind of whistleblowing is that? I think he was annoyed that he's heard these stories about UFO crashes, and that the AARO, the new acronym for the investigation of UFOs, they didn't have any information on this or access to that information, and he thought that was something that should be in their purview. Which of course, if they're investigating UFOs or UAPs or whatever in over the United States, that should be information they should have. The historical aspect of it should be there. So that would be one of the reasons you'd have a whistleblower doing something like that. But and Jerry Clark warned me about being too pessimistic about this. We really need more information before we can draw a complete and total conclusion about what he's saying and how valid it is. But the little bit of information we have leads me into the direction that suggests maybe this isn't as outstanding, isn't as exciting as is being made out to be in the media. I watched a reporter where he was talking about, he mentioned, or one of his cohorts mentioned, that there might have been crew recovered. And she said, well, she sends chills down my spine, shivers and chills down my spine. hearing this, and I'm thinking, good Lord, Don Schmidt and I were talking about this 30 years ago. It didn't send shivers down anybody's spine then, and they just relegated us to the tinfoil hat brigade type thing. They're too sophisticated being in UFOs. We go through this periodically where somebody comes out and looks like it's going to be blowing the lid off everything, and then the lid clamps back down. John Greenwald just put up a piece, I think a week ago last Monday, where he mentioned that some of the exceptions to the FOIA requests, the Freedom of Information requests, have been strengthened, making it more difficult to get FOIA requests on certain aspects of this stuff. Rather than moving toward open transparency, we're moving a little bit away from that. And this might be a whole way of kind of blunting the disclosure brigade by putting this stuff out here, and then suddenly we get no further. We can learn nothing more about it. So it's just, well, it's just a bunch of rumors, and we don't need to pay any attention to it.
If in fact this information that David Grusch has is legitimate, wouldn't Congress move faster in getting into these investigations that they're supposed to be getting into in order to find out who, what, when, where, why, and how?
Well, they're too busy investigating Trump to see if he colluded with the Russians on the 2016 election. I mean, we're still getting information on that. Now that we've got all these other diversions as well. And the other thing I would suggest that some of these investigations that Congress and the Senate are supposedly engaging in are critical to the functioning of this country. And discovering whether or not alien visitation is real isn't among them, because you look at the whole history. We can go back 75 years.
Right.
We can go back to the Roswell case. We can go back to the Foo Fighters of the Second World War and say this is where the modern era began. And now here we are in 2023, and that has not adversely affected life on the planet Earth in any way, shape, or form. So why should I worry about alien visitation when it hasn't affected my life at all? That sort of thing. So I think we've got to take a look at that. I wondered back in the Carter administration, if you remember the hostage situation that took place at the end of the Carter administration for 18 months or whatever it was. If that wasn't a diversion to keep Carter away from worrying about UFOs and flying saucers, because you remember Carter made a campaign promise, as has others, that we would get the information about UFOs. Well, nothing ever came out. And I did a book called UFOs in the Deep State looking at that. And well, why don't we know more about this? And I think the answer is it's all about the power. And if you talk too much about UFOs, if there really is alien visitation and you talk too much about it, your power may be diffused. And so it's about the power and the money. Dan Sheehan, who is a lawyer, told me, and I recount this in the book, told me that he had been asked by Carter to take a look at some of the UFO stuff. And he saw the secret Project Blue Book files, or part of them, that showed photographs of a crashed saucer and that sort of thing. But more importantly, Sheehan was telling me that when Carter met with George H.W. Bush, who at the time was the director of Central Intelligence, and they're discussing all these sorts of things, and Bush said to him, I would like to remain as the director of Central Intelligence when you take over. And Carter said, well, I'm bringing in my own guy. And then the topic moved to UFOs, and Carter asked him something about UFOs, and he said, well, I can't tell you about that. It's highly classified. You're not the president yet. Here's a guy who's going to become president. And the director of Central Intelligence said, well, I'm not going to discuss that with you. And I think the other dodge they use is, well, gee, Mr. President, there are all sorts of agencies involved in this investigation. And what we have to take a look at, we have to pull all this information together, and we'll get you a comprehensive report. And somehow that report never gets to them. And that's what we've been seeing for the last, 2.5 years. We're going to investigate this. We've created how many offices to investigate? We're going to have congressional hearings, and we've had how many of those? And we've gotten absolutely nothing.
If Carter asked Bush about the UFO question, and Bush said, well, no, too bad you're not president yet. Why didn't the person that President Carter installed as the director of the CIA find out the information that the president wanted and report back to the president? Like, to me, that seems like a no-brainer.
Well, I think what happened is once Carter took over president, you've got to realize it's going to be a horrendous job to move into, and UFOs will be moving down the list of priorities, of course. And I think, like I said, I think if he asked, I would like to know about these UFOs, and the answer is, you've got to remember that the appointees at the top, the very top of the various agencies or organizations, are governmental or presidential appointees, but the next level are bureaucrats that go from administration to administration to administration. And there's where some of the real power resides. And so when you ask that sort of question, the new director would probably say, what can you tell me about these UFOs? And it's the same thing. We've got to pull all this information together and we'll get it for you. And somehow that information never gets pulled together. Something diverts that attention. Something happens. And that was why I mentioned the hostage crisis. That diverted his attention for a long time. Other presidents had no interest in this sort of thing. I don't think George W. Bush cared. I don't think Donald Trump cared about flying saucers or UFOs. So I think that's the other part of the problem. The new president, I guess we could say we kind of overthrow our government every 4 years or 8 years, depending on the elections. But we keep replacing our government that way. And what is a priority for one government certainly isn't a priority for the next government. I mean, look at the things that Biden has done that were a priority for the Trump administration, and he countered a lot of that stuff. So we kind of overthrow our government every 4 years. So that's the way this stuff gets buried. Plus, we had the idea. I'd done a science fiction story or a horror story where there's a real live, honest to goodness vampire. Probably should say a real dead vampire, and the person who's discovered the identity says, well, I'm going to tell the public about you. And the vampire says, go ahead. Nobody will believe you anyway. And I think that's kind of where we are on UFOs. Well, go ahead and tell them. I was going to believe you anyway. They say, well, this stuff would have leaked out if it had been done. It's been leaking with us, Don Schmidt, my investigation has been leaking for 30 years and nothing gets done because the journalists and everybody's too sophisticated to believe in flying saucers.
But is it also possible, Kevin, that the number of woo-woos that are out there who make all these fantastic claims that cannot be substantiated, like there was somebody on another show that our network does, where they were saying there's over 85 different types of aliens that are visiting us on this planet, that are residing with us. Ladies are getting fetuses taken out of their wombs, and later on they're beamed up to a mothership where they interact with their child. There's so many questions, and how do these people who make these wild claims, how do they fit into the grand scheme of how John Q. Public starts looking at the UFO community? There seems to be no consistency. And if these were real events, would there not be more consistency with the reportings as well as the sightings and the type of saucers or the type of craft? Like, it seems that they're all over the board.
That's one of the big problems, and we have to separate the wheat from the chaff. That's the problem we all run into. We've got all the people out there telling these stories. John Mack said at one time, being an abductee is not a club you'd want to join. And I'm thinking it's absolutely a club these people want to join because it gives them a sense of community. It gives them a sense of brotherhood. I am abductee, and these are all my friends who are abductees, and we bond over that sort of thing. So it's truly a club. We have the researchers like John Mack and Bud Hopkins, who I think, to be fair to them, were unconsciously impressing their abductees with their own research conclusions. And John Mack actually said a number of times that he was struck by the idea that the abductees seemed to find the researcher whose research validates their experience. John Mack got the aliens with an Eastern philosophy, and Bud Hopkins got the cold calculating scientist, and David Jacobs, I'm going to say David Temple, he taught at Temple University. David Jacobs got the hybrids with the idea of invading the earth, and it was they get their own thing. And you take a look at their transcripts, and you can see, if you're looking for it, you can see the subtle influence the researcher, the operator, the hypnotist exerts on the people. So we have that problem to deal with. So you have to take a look at all of that. But and that's what I'm saying. We had I think the electromagnetic effects might be a good way to go with this. There's a lot of consistency inside those reports, but it's a small part of the overall UFO community. But we take a look at what happens with those people, and then we have to deal with people who are just making it up to get their names in the newspaper. And sometimes their stories are spectacular, and they want to, or they've influenced the direction of research for a long time. We had to deal with the MJ-12 documents that I'm absolutely convinced the researcher. In fact, I know that the person who released it, Bill Moore, had said to a number of different people he was thinking of creating a Roswell-like document because he'd run into a brick wall in his investigation. He thought if there was these documents out there that people who'd been involved at Roswell might be more talkative about what they had seen. I wasn't going to say reticent to talk. That's what they break through. But the documents, he hinted about creating a document. Lo and behold, a few months later, 18 months later, he's got the MJ-12 documents, and that diverted his research for a long time. I think the majority of the UFO population community now understands that the MJ-12 documents are a hoax, but I still get arguments from people about those sorts of things, and or arguments about the Aztec case, or did you think about this? Did you think about that? You just had a Canadian minister send a letter to the Canadian government about, you've got to look at this stuff seriously, because you want to get caught up in the mystique of with the United States. It was a big deal a couple of weeks ago, and he referenced this 1950 stuff, and I'm thinking that could be Wilbur Smith, yes, and Robert Saubacher, and that stuff. And I looked at that and I said, but Saubacher, who verified the UFO flying saucer stuff, and said Behind the Flying Saucers, which was the book about the Aztec case, or part of the book about the Aztec case, was thoroughly debunked. And yet we're still dealing with that from 1950. So
it's crazy. Hey, Kev, stand by. We've got to take our break, please. Don't go anywhere. Stay seated. No, stay seated. No need to stand up. Exonation, our guest is Kevin Randle, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and we'll be back on the other side as we continue this fascinating conversation with our good friend. And you can listen to Kevin's replays and archives at www.xzbn.net. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Kevin Randle and I return on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Just a couple of things to bring to your attention, Explanation. I was advised earlier today that there was problems with our stream at xzbn.net. That was due to a problem with our servers in the United Kingdom. That problem has been rectified. Everything is back running up at xzbn.net, where you can listen to the X-Zone Broadcast Network and a lot of our shows with our compliments. That gentleman you see on your screen, Kevin Randle, he's got his own show up there, A Different Perspective. And once again, his blogspot is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Kevin, is it possible that we're looking at the wrong way to look for the evidence of UFOs as well as the extraterrestrial visitors that are coming here? Why do we expect them to be carbon-based units, and why do we expect their science to be like our science, that we can actually understand why, who, what, when, where, why? It seems that there's a lot of people who are putting too much of the human factor into this entire equation.
There is some of that. I think part of the problem goes back to the science fiction movies of the 1930s, 1940s. Whenever they showed an alien, it was always a human in some kind of strange costume, things like that. And I think we've been kind of conditioned to that throughout the history of our media, simply because it's only recently that the capability to create really obnoxious-looking aliens has been available to Hollywood and the other filmmakers. I think that's part of the problem. And I think that we all look at the idea that intelligence is going to evolve in a certain way, that you need the two eyes for the stereoscopic vision. You need an opposable thumb so you can grasp things. I'm not sure about walking upright as a necessary contributor to intelligence, but I think we look at our evolution and kind of apply it there. I've also said repeatedly that if my example used to be wonderful because it worked quite well, that if you took a VCR and a TV and a TV monitor and a power pack back to Merlin the Magician and showed it to him, and you got this black ribbon, the videotape, and if you know the secrets, you can get sound and color pictures off it and say, okay, here it is duplicated. And to do that, he would have to understand two things that are invisible: magnetism and electricity, which of course, at that time frame, they didn't understand that. I think that if we're dealing with an alien race, and they've discovered a way of traveling the interstellar distances, which we can't do. And we talk theoretically on ways of doing it, but we really don't have the means to do it at this point. I don't know when we'll get the means. Although that kind of reminds me, and if you remember the movie Forbidden Planet, at the beginning, as they're introducing it, they say men from Earth first reached the moon at the end of the 21st century. Well, it was like 15 years later from that movie that we actually got onto the moon. So our science does progress, but I think an alien science would be so far superior to ours that, as Arthur C. Clarke said, it would be like magic to us. It would seem like magic, and I think that's where we are. There's as I say, I think there's discussions about parallel evolution, that the similar conditions on planets would give rise to intelligence that would have some of the attributes that we have, but there have been some cases where the aliens described don't look very human. They're not very humanoid at all. So, it's just one of those things that we have been conditioned to think that way. And there's been discussion in the UFO community on the possibility of silicon-based life form, opposed to carbon-based life form and things like that. But I would say I think the physics of the universe probably are the same throughout our entire universe. The physical laws that we operate under here on Earth probably exist throughout our galaxy and then the rest of the universe as well. So that may be some of it as well.
So I guess we can say that the way that we anticipate seeing an extraterrestrial would be like the Santa Claus syndrome, because Santa Claus looks the same, even though Santa Claus has never really existed.
Well, because people have been pushing that.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of the small gray aliens was pushed particularly after some of the abduction cases. I think Whitley Strieber kind of set that in people's minds. But if you go to Europe or you go to Africa or you go to Asia and you talk to people who are talking about having been abducted, oftentimes the aliens don't look anything like what's reported in the United States or in the North American continent. They're different. They're a lot different. And we have cases of the aliens looking really bizarre. Some of the stuff out of South America, though, looks like the aliens from science fiction movies, which kind of cracks me up.
As something else that has gone by the by, you and I have talked about cattle mutilations. We've talked about a lot of different aspects. But somebody was sending us a bunch of information over the last couple of weeks about these underground bases where the alien... Yeah, and it's like, oh, come on, here we go again, the merry-go-round, right? Absolutely.
It becomes full circle. Yeah, the underground base ideas... ridiculous. I remember I was in Mesa, Arizona at a conference. It must have been in the mid-1980s. And somebody was there talking about the underground bases and how they're all connected with tunnels underground and all of that sort of thing. But then nobody ever comes up with the pictures. Nobody ever has any evidence for this.
Right.
And that's one of the problems. I can understand if you're dealing with an alien spacecraft that is in sight for 5 or 10 minutes, or it's landed, left a burned area, and it's gone, that there's not a whole lot you can gather in the way of information, but there is some traces there. There's some evidence there. But with a lot of this stuff, there's just not the kind of evidence you'd expect. You mentioned cattle mutilations, and the one thing that always cracked me up is I've seen this picture a number of times of a cow laying in a field that has been partially mutilated, and they say, you see, there's no footprints of the scavengers around it. And I'm thinking, yeah, look at all the bird droppings on the carcass. That might be a hint right there. What happened? And they would talk about upside mutilations, meaning the side it's laying on.
Right.
Predators couldn't get to it to attack. And it's always the soft tissues as well. I was challenged once. Somebody said, well, when we've analyzed some of the animals, there's an extreme lack of copper in the blood. How do you explain that? And I thought, well, there's a darn good question. And thank you, Internet, because I could answer it. I discovered that copper deficiency in cattle is a real problem, and that often the ranchers provide copper supplements to their animals. And once a cow is given birth, for example, the copper levels in that animal are extremely low. And so the answer to the question is that's an environmental problem that can be rectified with the proper supplements.
Yeah, just like us who need to take vitamins, multivitamins, or iron pills or whatever. Kevin, with your ear to the ground, have you heard of any new exciting UFO cases?
Well, there's some interesting stuff going on, but the problem is we're running into the same problem we've had for literally decades, and that's figuring out where the good cases are from the bad ones. Fran Ridge does something called MADAR, which is a multi-detector for looking for anomalous spikes in the environment, and then try to match those to UFO sightings. Somebody has a UFO sighting at a certain time in a certain location. They look at the MADAR center around that and see if there are some changes in the electromagnetic activity, for example. And there have been some interesting correlations with the MADAR information where they would, somebody will have a sighting and there'll be a corresponding spike in the electromagnetic and some of the other stuff, and the compass spins, suggesting, of course, the electromagnetic. So there's some very interesting things going on with that, but the sightings aren't really spectacular. It's not aliens running around loose or landing or anything like that. It's just that somebody saw something in the distance and then there was a spike at the node center. And there's been a couple of cases in which the node centers were close enough that they could get some kind of readings from 2 or 3 different node centers. I had suggested to Fran that they try to get pictures of people around those node centers who would go out and look. And he said, yeah, we've already doing that. And so they're doing that sort of thing. And I think that's a wonderful bit of research, because if you've got a UFO sighting and you've got the instrumentality to record that independently of the sighting, and yet you can get somebody out there, some other people out there to look at the object and maybe photograph it, then you've got a nice body of evidence. So that's going on. It's all done outside the purview of the government or the Air Force or any of the investigations going on. It's something that's being done by private citizens. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful project that people are dedicating their resources to purchasing the equipment and monitoring what's going on in their environment to see if there's any kind of correlation.
What is your take on NASA apparently showing a greater interest in the UFO UAP phenomenon?
Well, I sat there and sat through most of their presentations, and there just wasn't much there at all. It's the same sort of thing. Well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we're partnering with these people to gather this sort of data.
Right.
But I think in the long run, what happens is the public interest in this wanes, and suddenly it just drops out of sight. The Air Force investigated UFOs for 22 years, and you can see spikes in the interest where they were really trying hard. The Ruppelt years, for example, in the 1951, 52, into 53, where he was gathering the data and they were doing legitimate investigations and all of that sort of thing. And yet, pretty soon the interest changed in the Air Force and nobody was doing it. They were filing the reports, throwing them away, or just not doing the follow-up investigation. So I'm just not enthusiastic about any of this because we've seen it all before.
Kevin, is it possible that during the early days of ufology, going to the late 40s to the mid 50s, that the technology wasn't as attuned as it is now? And with the attunement of technology and the advancements of technology, that what could have made the UFO claim seem more probable isn't there today because of all the modern technology we have that is basically, trying to find out if it's true or not.
I'd take it a step further, and I think that part of the problem we had in the 1940s and early 50s is the sophistication of the witnesses. We weren't all geared to what's in the sky around us or what environmental factors may produce some of these effects. So it's that what you've outlined, and that as well, we've become more sophisticated and realize that that's a meteor, regardless of what you say, that a meteor flying overhead can make a lot of noise, sonic booms and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's some of it right there. And we can spot that. I had a guy call me one day and said, did you see that flying saucer that came over just a few minutes ago? And I see how it's a Skylab. I saw it, or the Space Lab, space station,
right.
International Space Station. He had seen that and watched it across the sky, and he called me and didn't realize what it was. Anytime Venus is near the moon, people are thinking that here's a spacecraft, or when Venus is at its closest and brightest, people are sometimes fooled by it, even today, but not so much today as it was in the past.
Kevin, as always, talking to you makes time fly, my friend. It is truly a time-traveling experience when I talk to you. First of all, thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend. And we all look forward. Now, I'm talking about everybody listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network and watching us on Simul TV. We all can't wait until you start your show again because you, my friend, are loved.
Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate the kind words.
The nice part about kind words is they're always the truth.
Thank you. And in that case, people go out and buy my book so I can earn my 25 cents royalty on each sale.
We'll do our best to get it out there, Kevin. Once again, speaking about your books, any new books coming up?
I've got one coming out in the fall called 1973, and it relates partially to the Pascagoula abduction, which, if there's really abductions, this would be the one.
Right.
And what was going on in 1973 in the world of ufology, which was much more than just the Pascagoula sighting. It'll be out in the fall. I've done a couple of other books. The Best of Project Blue book. I did the Levelland book, Understanding Roswell, which is a different kind of take on the Roswell case. So just go to Amazon.com and you can find a whole list of the books is under Kevin Randle. And if you're interested in the Vietnam War, look for Eric Helm, because I wrote a bunch of action adventure books about not my experiences, but the Vietnam War.
And it's never too early to start buying Christmas gifts because Kevin Randle's books are always great Christmas gifts.
And birthday presents too.
And birthday presents. Let me see. Thanksgiving, because there's no turkeys. That's right. Anniversaries and any other day of the week, because they make great reading. Before I go, Kevin, thank you very much for your service and the great things that you did for us while you were over on the other side, protecting us and making sure that freedom and democracy reign. And until the next time I see you, my friend, which I hope won't be so long, take care of yourself, and thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate the time.
Anytime, my friend. Exonation, that's it for this hour. I'll be back on the other side of the news as once again we continue here in the Exo from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario. Don't forget, Kevin Randle's books are available on Amazon.com, and his website is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I'm Rob McConnell. Exxon at exonradiotv.com is the website, and to contact me by email, exxon at exonradiotv.com. This is the Exxon. I am Rob McConnell. Catch you on the other side of the news.